Are you living inside a simulation? Because there's no chance that cute nose of yours is real. But this still begs the question, are we actually living in a simulation?
Maury, that's not class. That wasn't your teacher. This isn't your school. This entire world is not the world. We're inside a huge simulation chamber on an alien spaceship. Wait a minute, what are you talking about?
Many bright minds, like Elon Musk or Neil deGrasse Tyson, have suggested this by quoting the simulation hypothesis. What that is, and why Neil deGrasse Tyson is wrong in trying to disprove it, coming up. Check out how computer games looked in the 90s and how they look now, almost 30 years later. And what artificial intelligence looked like just 15 years ago and how it looks now. With these rapid leaps in technology, it might soon be possible to create self-aware and self-replicating AI programs. These computer programs can be used to simulate our own history and maybe even change one fact to see the ripple effect of that occurrence. The simulated beings themselves would be self-aware, have free will, and would not know that they are a computer program. Why would someone do that? Well, for example, you could simulate the entire human history but introduce a long-haired carpenter that does anything he can to avoid swimming, just to see what the civilization would look like 2000 years later. Bruh. You could simulate your own world history but introduce a disturbance variable, such as an angry Austrian dude who tries to take over the world and see how the world reacts. Or you could give them a global crisis, like a pandemic or an environmental calamity to deal with that might happen to your world, and check out how they solve it so you can take the same approach. Well, do you think we would or will create such a simulation? To answer this, consider these three options given by Nick Bostrom. Either any civilization will cease to exist before a post-human stage of evolution is reached, in which they are capable of programming such a simulation. This would mean that such a simulation is never possible, because we or any civilization would go extinct before they succeed. Scientists call this the Great Filter. If you don't want to miss my upcoming video on the Great Filter, consider subscribing. Or secondly, the drive of any civilization to simulate their own or any other civilization is zero, no matter how far evolved and technically versed they are. So, no matter how advanced the technology of any creature in the whole universe is, no one will ever try to simulate a self-aware creature. Or lastly, we will eventually try and succeed in creating such a simulated, self-aware and self-developing civilization. If you deny the first two options, the third option must be the case. If any one person within a civilization will eventually try to create a simulated world, and if they don't die before they succeed, then inevitably, eventually a simulation will be programmed. So, under any circumstances, any civilization will eventually create a detailed simulation of their own history or of another possible civilization. The simulated beings will have no idea that they are simulated and will think that they live in a real world. Eventually, they will try to create their own simulation. And the inhabitants of their simulated world will again try to simulate yet another world. And this will go on almost indefinitely. But what does that mean for us? Well, let's take all these simulated worlds together and put them into a giant galactic jar together with the original world. Then we shake up the jar real nice and pull out one world at random. This is you being born into one of these worlds. Now, how likely is it that you actually pull out the original world, the odds are astronomically low. You have one original world and billions and billions
and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions
of others. So from a mathematical standpoint, it is almost guaranteed that you are living in a simulated world, right? There is one solution that tries to resolve this by fixing the mathematical approach. Look around you. Do we have a sentient, self-aware and self-evolving AI that is being used to create a perfect simulation? Not that I know of. That means that apart from the very first and the very last world, you can remove all other worlds from your galactic jar. Why? Because all those worlds are simulated worlds that have already created a simulated world themselves. This leaves us with two options. Either we are the world that has been created last and have not yet created a simulated world ourselves, or we are the very first world that has not yet succeeded in creating the very first simulation. Now there is a 50-50 chance that we are the original world and do not live in a simulation. That's also what Neil deGrasse Tyson says here.
I used to think we were living in a simulation. Then I talked to some colleagues, did some more reading, and now I feel a little better that we're probably not. The argument for it was, you get a real universe, and then people in there get really smart and they program computers and they create worlds. And the people in that world don't know that they're fake, all right? And then they evolve and they develop computers and they create a world, and they create a world, and this goes all the way down. And so there's the real world and all the worlds that can create worlds, except the last one, which is still working on it. Eventually they'll get there. All right, throw a dart. Chances are you're going to hit a world that's simulated. That's us. But we don't know how to make an actual simulated world where everybody thinks it's real. So either we're the last of those worlds that's still working on it, or we're the first one, which is actually real.
But unfortunately, there is a flaw in that logic. This calculation by Neil only works if every simulated world only simulates exactly one world themselves. Let's say we do eventually have the capability to create such a world. Do you believe we would only create a single one? It is more likely that we create multiple ones. For example, we could create such a simulation and have life evolve at an accelerated speed, so we could find out how our simulated twins solve their environmental crisis, to steal their solution and solve our own. In that case, it would make sense to create multiple worlds to increase the odds that they succeed. And some of them might come to the same conclusion and create a couple of worlds themselves. Let's say every world creates just 20 new worlds, which is a very low number if you're trying to solve a global crisis. That would mean that by the 5th generation, there are over 3 million worlds. And all but one are simulated. Just within the 10th generation, you are looking at almost 11 trillion simulated worlds against one real world. So I am afraid Neil deGrasse Tyson's reasoning is off by quite a bit. But that doesn't necessarily mean we are living in a simulation. As stated in the beginning, we also might inevitably die before we create such a program. Ain't that a comforting thought? Bye!
billions and 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 billions and